Welcome back, Mighty Vandals, to Tubbs at the Club, University of Idaho affiliate on the Big Sky Podcast Network. I'm your host, Brian Marceau, joined by co-host Dallas Hammer, who is laughing about a private comment, correct?
Yes, private comment. I will keep it private.
Yeah.
You're no fucking fun, Brian.
You can say that. You can say that in public, man. So anyway, look, dude.
Brian, you're the one who told me to stop talking about the guy, so I'm not going to make the joke.
I did not. No one tells anyone what to say and not say on this show. But since we talked about the joke you're laughing at, look, guys, we had our view count jump. Live viewers have been pretty high for the last couple episodes about Kloss being fired and then Pribble being hired. View count's lower tonight because as we record on March 23rd at 8:30 p.m., Gonzaga is playing right now, so we don't have 40 viewers. As our viewing numbers climbed just past double figures, Dallas and I were joking in the background of our program, and I may have brought up that we now have more viewers than Kloss ever had wins in a season. That's what Dallas didn't want to talk about. So this is the messenger who brought that dead horse up. We're going to move on. But anyway, Dallas, now that we've spent 2 minutes enunciating a background joke, you couldn't be doing better than you are now in Spokane, obviously.
No, goodness, no. I sitting here just honestly, Brian, I know that right now we're still in basketball mode, but I'm sitting here thinking about the second we stop talking about basketball, we're going to jump right into football. That's all I can think about right now.
Yeah,
football is almost here.
Yeah, as far as off-season timing goes, if neither season's going, this is at least the time where we have excitement on both ends. So yeah, you're right, it's different. So hey, it's let's just jump into Around the Bar, brought to us by Hughes River Expedition. Look, we have essentially two agenda items. We're going to lead with basketball and then jump into spring football. Spring football probably might be a longer end to talk, but the actual news is, hey, since we last recorded, did an episode about the announcement of new men's basketball coach Alex Pribble coming over most recently as the associate head coach at Seattle U, now head coach of the University of Idaho. His introductory press conference took place. That'd be Monday of this week, right, Dallas? Yeah. So introductory press conference took place Monday, March 20th, month in advance of I teach. So it's a month in advance of an important day in every middle and high school in the world. But look, we want to go over basic reactions to the press conference, and we're not gonna replay the whole press conference, guys. It's on ESPN Plus if you're curious. Also, Pribble recorded.
I want to jump in real quick. I also, to point people in the correct direction, you can also go to govandals.com, give the Vandals that sweet little bit of that half of a cent of ad money by watching it on govandals.com.
I suppose that is an option. Johnny Ballgame also aired an interview with Alex Pribble on KTIK. That's available in the Prater in the Ballgame podcast stream, which I'm going to reference some comments on that. But look, broadly speaking, it was one of the more exciting press conferences overall. Not exactly the same level of Jason Eck excitement because football is king in American sports. The basketball is number two. And look, it's been a long time since there's been any earned enthusiasm around Idaho basketball. Dallas, your reaction, look, you can take the wheel, take it whatever direction you want to some of the stuff Pribble brought up. Because when we messaged, you were pretty dang stoked hearing what Pribble had to say about Idaho basketball, and you're like me. Look, it's been Idaho's had five. We're off as bad a run as is possible to have. In the last 5 seasons, Idaho has 25 D1 wins total. There's a reason why, if you list all our old episodes, the tone is what it is. But Dallas, you were pretty stoked hearing what Pribble had to say. So take the wheel, man.
Yeah, Brian. Honestly, and I'm not saying that this guy's going to come out here and win the division in year one like Sean McVay did, but it reminded me, again, I'm sorry that I have to dump Rams shit on people here. It reminded me of watching my beloved Los Angeles / St. Louis Rams go from the worst 5-year stretch in NFL history where they won 15 games in 5 years to Jeff Fisher came in, and Jeff Fisher talked a whole lot about how they were going to turn things around immediately, and that didn't happen. And then Sean McVay came in and did not say that and said, hey, look, we've got, like, there's some good blocks here, but there is a lot of work that needs to be done. And that's what Alex Pribble came to this presser like. He didn't, it was a slightly different effect than Jason Eck, as you mentioned. Eck speaking about the sleeping giant that was Idaho football and thinking that there was enough talent here to win immediately. Pribble took a slightly different approach, and I really appreciated that. He said specifically They're not looking to fix this program with the portal. They're not going to do that. They're looking for guys that want to be Vandals. They're looking for guys that want to get degrees here. They want to be trailblazers and build this program into Big Sky champions someday, but not do it in year one. They want to do it slowly, continual progress year over year. And when you look at the guy's resume, everywhere he's been in the last 10 years, he's won. And not necessarily winning year one, building the foundations for a program that's successful for more than just one spike and then they collapse, kind of like Idaho football in most of the FBS years. He talked very heavily about wanting to build a program, build a core of guys, use the transfer portal to augment that core, but build a base that can just be the base for years to come. And that Brian, I'm sold. I was sold immediately the second he said that.
I was surprised at how many specifics we actually have from the press conference because, of course, Pribble doesn't have a full roster as of official, relative to official commitments or official defections from the program. Idaho's lost Yusuf Salih and Tyler Halligan. They're glad they were here. I don't think that's big losses at all. I mean, Halligan didn't play 1 second, and look, Solly was the fourth or fifth best player from the last place team in the Big Sky. So not too concerned about those losses. That leaves Pribble with 5 scholarship spots when you factor in Solly leaving and the four seniors who graduated. So relative to not even having a complete roster, one, I was excited the way Pribble talked about style of play. He referenced it on the interview with Johnny Ballgame too, where similar to Jason Eck in the press conference in Moscow, he said, look, I need to have a roster to go over specifics, meaning he's going to be flexible relative to what the roster has. But big picture, he made it clear on the Ballgame show, Idaho is going to be a fast-paced team, which offensively, that had me perked immediately wanting to buy tickets. And second, he said Idaho's going to have to focus on defensive improvement. But the reason I brought up the first part is he's not talking about defense in the Tony Bennett at Virginia, Dick Bennett, Washington State style of the offense is dog shit and the games are all 52 to 47. He wants the defense to be disruptive, which will feed into a fast-paced offense. So style of play question is, looks like the teams are going to be kind of fast-paced. I wouldn't be shocked if, honestly, Idaho becomes a different version of Eastern Washington over the last handful of seasons. The other thing, and viewers get to see this treat because I do think Idaho's on the right track. I want to give a shout out to Trevin Pixley really quick. We definitely made fun of Trevin for his terrible article about Zach Kloss midseason about the right track. And then Trevin, it's a joke. Some people caught, some people didn't, brought back that right track for the headline talking about the Pribble hire. So I want to give Trevin Pixley some credit there. He asked some good questions at the press conference too. But other thing, another takeaway is Pribble talked about wanting to recruit guys who he wants to recruit skilled players. Now you might hear that and think, well, duh. But no, he was more specific. He wants to have at least about 4 shooters at least on the floor, 4 3-point shooters at least on the floor at all times, with maybe one guy who's not a 3-point threat on there so that defenses cannot collapse. He wants to play pace and space, which if you are not familiar with what that means, it means, fast paced, like we talked about. But second, he wants to spread the floor so guys can create shots within the offense. Hearing those two things, I pulled it away from this point. It made me think, you know what? This is going to be kind of like a similar style, a different version of Eastern Washington, which makes sense because, hey, that's where Pribble cut his teeth at the D1 level, was on Jim Hayford's staff at Eastern Washington, a staff that has done very well since Jim Hayford left. David Riley is doing great at Eastern. Shante Leggins before David Riley did great at Eastern. Now he's at Portland. Pribble is the 3rd assistant on that roster who's been a head coach in the Big Sky now. So those were some of my initial takeaways. Was I want Idaho to be better, but at this point, I do care. If we can have a fun style of play, I'll take it over, like what Idaho State or University of Montana does. And thus far, man, that's what Pribble said Idaho basketball is going to be. So I'm still stoked as hell. I'm not trying to pivot the conversation, Dallas, but we've hit a couple of the concrete points. What else to you from the press conference or that interview with Ballgame kind of stood out?
So I did want to just mention, I think the specific quote that Pribble said was along the lines of saying that you're not likely to see more than one guy who can't shoot the ball on the floor, which Brian, I have to double down on your statement there. Like, even if Idaho basketball is bad next year, it should be fun bad. It should be more up tempo, should be more explosive. I'm assuming defensively they can't get a whole lot worse. So even if they're still bad, it should at least be more entertaining, and we should be able to at least see that there's blocks for the future. And I mean, the last 5 years, have we really seen anything to build off of? It's been a new roster almost every single year. I'm expecting that to change moving forward from these comments, and that's what I'm very excited to see. I know we're not going to see the hey, make the playoffs in year one like Eck did. I don't, at the moment, we don't know what the roster is going to look like. I don't see that happening, but what I do see is this should be a whole lot more fun, and that's what matters to me. Make Vandal basketball fun again, Brian.
Yeah, you talked about turnaround, and Pribble did bring that up if he's not looking for a quick fix. Now, he did in the ball game interview separately stipulate that everyone is going to be getting transfer portal guys. It's more using transfer portal guys to plug a hole or two and have your overall recruitment based off of 4-year guys. So if you're a viewer, if you're a fan who you initially saw, we have an offer for a guy named EJ Neal from San Francisco Community College. If you saw that JC offer and you had a little bit of PTSD about a guy coming up, purging the roster and just trying to get guys for a quick turnaround, like Bobby Petrino style in football or something like that, that's not the route it's going to go. But look, Pribble he's already made a ton of offers to guys he was clearly recruiting at Seattle U or knew to recruit them the moment he landed in Moscow. Like, Case Why Not now finally has an Idaho offer. And I say finally because that's, I think the guy's 4th Big Sky Conference offer: Montana State, Idaho now. No, that might be his 5th because he has Idaho State, Eastern Washington, and I believe both Montana and Montana State prior. Now Idaho's on there as well. But dudes hit the ground running. We've needed recruitment news in basketball for a while. We knew we were going to get none with Klaus having, the lame duck year, but the guy does need to get a full roster, and his background at Seattle is going to help there. But as far as an actual turnaround timeline, I kind of want to point to the St. Martin's time, Dallas, where St. Martin's for the year prior to Alex Pribble taking over, that was the D2 team in Washington that Pribble coached for a few years. They're 6-22 the year before he arrived. They're 15-13 at the end of Pribble's first year. That's kind of the benchmark I want to look at for improvement for a moment, which is like you're right, like going in 1 year from last place in conference to a championship. Look, Sacramento State did that in football, but like Troy, you could also point to catastrophic injuries the year before that explain the last place finish. That's not why Idaho finished last place basketball last season. But pointing to that jump to 500, which you'd say that's a competitive team. That's a team that might win a Big Sky Conference game with de facto home court advantage like Idaho has. That to me would be like when you say playoffs, that would be Idaho's version of the playoffs, is being actually competitive or putting their footprint in some way on who the eventual championship, the eventual champion of the Big Sky Conference is. I don't think that's an unreasonable viewpoint to have on what a turnaround could be. Dallas is, can this team be above 500 for the first time since 2017, 2018? That's a real question, but I don't think the answer certainly this far away can't be no, because there's other teams in the Big Sky that are going to be in serious flux. And honestly, I don't think it's bad that Pribble has a minimum half a roster to recruit on his own, because look, we've had last place finishes the last half decade. That's what it's been. All last place except one third to last place. So, there's a few guys I hope we keep on the roster, but otherwise I'm glad Pribble's got about a half roster worth of spots to play with. And I'm now going to be focusing basketball wise on the recruitment trail, as well as look, we still would love to have Pribble on the show, and the athletic department stance has still been the same so far. I think it's kind of dumb, but whatever. We're going to pay attention to the recruitment trail, and that's kind of the next evolution of basketball, Dallas. Anything else you want to hit on before we look at spring football?
Yeah, I just want to say that, I mean, I don't think it's definitely not realistic to think Idaho can win the Big Sky next year. I don't see that fast of a turnaround, probably not happening. Seeing Idaho at least crawl from the basement to being a bottom third team that can punch right up against the top of the Big Sky, and then Maybe you don't have the depth, or maybe you don't have the experience. That is absolutely realistic to see, especially when you see guys like Jalen Cone leaving NAU, Dalton Connect leaving Northern Colorado. Like, other cellar dweller programs are starting to lose some of their best talent. There is a window here for Idaho to shoot forward. It's going to depend on what the roster ends up being, Brian, because obviously a guy like Isaac Jones would love to have a guy like Isaac Jones back. Isaac Jones goes into the transfer portal. I'm gonna guess he probably has better offers than Idaho. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with the roster. I did think it was really cool to see Taryn Frank at the conference. He even spoke, and the quote, he said something about he's transferred a bunch before. He loves it here at Idaho. He wants to be here. Really cool. I hope that the guy comes back healthy. I hope he plays lights out next year. Would love to see that. Some of those guys that have struggled through the last few years. Love to see a couple of those guys stick around. But again, right now, we don't know what's going to happen. We're in that weird flux position of Pribble gets to figure out who's on the roster, who's coming in, who he doesn't want to come back. He gets to kind of sort all this out himself. So right now, yeah, let's say it. He could go 500 easy. I think that would be a great season. I would be thrilled with 500 if we can go there. But we don't know what the roster is going to look like. It's pretty tough to predict it right now.
No, finishing over 500, and you mean, of course, in D1 play.
Yes.
So finishing over 500 in D1 play based off of this most recent season's results would be Idaho being in 4th or 5th place in conference. Still below, like the top 3 in the conference was a step above the rest of the conference, and then the teams 4 through 10 were not that far away. But Weber State was 3rd, 18-15 overall, 8-4 in conference, and then Montana State and Eastern were kind of runaway top 2 in the league. So I guess let me bring back hit that point that you addressed. Obviously, no one should expect winning a championship in his first season because Idaho just finished last. But finishing in the top half of the conference, man, with the flux this conference is in, I don't think that's unreasonable. Some of the programs that have had coaching changes, look, Idaho State's doing better, but they still finished with just 11 total wins. Idaho State only had 9 D1 wins last season, but 7 of them came. No, my bad. 8. They finished with 8 conference wins, 9 D1 wins on the season. Wild how Idaho State doing that well in conference kind of changed the outlook, because they had 1 more total win than Idaho, but were significantly better in conference. But I guess maybe that's the first Mendoza line. Dallas is top half of the conference and have to beat Idaho State, man. I'd say both those things are on the table.
Yes, completely agree. I would sure hope that Pribble beats Idaho State. They haven't looked spectacular. I mean, yes, they, like you said, 8 conference wins, 9 D1 wins total. I don't know enough about their out of conference schedule. Could have been a whole lot stronger than the schedule Zach Kloss put together. That was very obviously an attempt to win enough games to keep his job. I'm very intrigued to see. Pribble said that he's been in charge of scheduling at Seattle U. Very interested to see maybe Brian, and we haven't brought this up in a while, and I know I bitch too much about Zach Kloss, but I'm still pissed off that we lost the Wazoo game. Like, one of the longest standing rivalries in college basketball is over because of the state of Idaho basketball, because of what happened with the coach the last 4 years. I'm hoping Pribble can at least build back a little bit stronger schedule. Maybe we can get Wazoo back on the books once Idaho becomes something more than there's 4 quadrants, and realistically Idaho's in the 5th of them. So if beating Idaho someday means anything to a program, hopefully that means we can get the Wazoo game back. That's what I really care about.
I'm really glad that you brought up the other part that Pribble referenced about scheduling, because you're right. He did bring up that was part of his responsibilities at Seattle U. He was involved in scheduling. Obviously, he was involved in recruiting. We haven't been able to sit down and ask him questions, but we were told he was also involved quite a bit in the actual game coaching, which, if you're like a number 3 assistant, you do more recruiting, you do supportive stuff on the bench, but you don't necessarily drop plays and stuff like that. But Pribble has both head coaching experience and a little bit more active on bench experience based off what we've been told at the D1 level. So I guess to put a button on this, Dallas, 1, Seattle U scheduled a lot of a decent amount of west of the Mississippi teams this last season, mostly mid-major, but you'd call it not all mid-major. You'd certainly call it stronger than Idaho easily. They scheduled two Pac-12 games at Washington and at Oregon State. Then played Portland State, UC San Diego, Cal State Fullerton, North Dakota, Utah State, and then a couple east of the Mississippi. But that's kind of the scheduling template they had of a couple Power Fives, and then the rest were mid-major. So is that going to be what we have? I don't know, but I wouldn't be shocked if it's something like that. But put a button on this. It's been a few days.
How many Bible schools did they play, though, Brian?
No Bible schools. I know that was a joke. I'm going to pretend it was not. Only one sub D1 game. They scheduled Pacific Lutheran, which that's another Northwestern team at least. But hey, it's been more than a week since the announcement. It's been a handful of days since the press conference. I know you were like me, stoked as hell at the announcement. Your energy after hearing him talk a couple times, trending up or trending down?
Trending neutral. Honestly, Brian, when we did the show where we talked about the coaches we'd heard about being candidates for the job. We didn't know about Pribble at the time. After that, we did all the research, and my excitement shot through the roof. It has not declined, but it hasn't necessarily gone any further. But I would count that a win in the press conference. My excitement is the exact same that it was when he was announced as the hire. I think he's the right hire. I think he's going to kick ass here. I think Big Sky Championship is maybe a couple more years down the road that I don't want to think about, but I do think Idaho is going to be immediately respectable on the basketball court, which I haven't been able to say in at least 5 years.
See, my energy is trending up after hearing him speak a couple times because we took care of the stylistic questions of what is a Pribble team going to look like relative to how far away we are on the season. But you know what? As we get recruitment news, we'll talk about new guys on the team. And then as we get into basketball season, obviously that'll be a ramp up. But now, Dallas, we have football to talk about, but we have something else to talk about first.
Are you looking for a great all-inclusive week-long vacation? Don't look past your backyard if you are. Hughes River Expeditions has been vandal-owned and operated since 1976, and they're ready to take you on the vacation of a lifetime. Enjoy a multi-day trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River of no return, the Salmon River Canyons, or the Selway. You can even check out special trips like one to see the Perseid meteor shower. Camp on pristine beaches, run amazing whitewater, hike scenic trails, spot wildlife, soak in beautiful natural hot springs, and fish some of the most remote stretches of river in the entire damn country. Just bring your clothes and let HRE handle the rest. Grab a paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. Call them now at 800-262-1882. Again, that's 800-262-1882. Or check them out at hughesriver.com. Brian, it's fucking football time. And now it's spring football, so it's really not football. It's practices, but it's football. It's back. It's here. I have a bunch of things I want to talk about, but I'm going to kick it to you first. Where do you want to take our discussion of spring football 2023?
Well, look, the first thing we got to hit, which I'm stoked to tell about spring football too. But I think we need to address first the changing subtext of Vandal football. Because look, when Jason Eck came over last year, all we had were unanswered questions about what Idaho football was going to be and about how the team's going to develop and could they be okay? Could they be good? Like, what the hell does that mean? We have a couple of those things answered now. The first one, and to me, the most important to pay attention to overall, is that we now get to have 7-5 as a benchmark of what Vandal football should probably be around, which means, I just listened to an interview Jason Eck did on the Scoreboard podcast with James Aldrich. Actually, really, really good interview. And Jason Eck acknowledged, or he described last season as Idaho beat one playoff team. They beat the bad teams and they beat the okay teams. But that's a solid first season. And Idaho needs to grow from there, but to grow from there, it's continue to beat the bad teams, continue to beat the okay teams, but now they got to find ways to start beating playoff teams for Idaho to make the next developmental step. So I bring that up because we're now not looking at this as in, okay, like what has to be there for this team to be okay. It's now, if Idaho's going to start beating playoff teams, there's a couple position groups that are going to have to get better, and there's some that are going to have to be stable. We're going to use spring football to me to start looking at some of those position groups that are going to have to get better for Idaho to beat more playoff teams. You'd say overall Idaho was about 1-3 against playoff teams last season, which that fits right in there with good but not great football team, or like pretty good but not great football team. So like that's the first thing I want to address with what we're going to find out in spring football is we're not starting from scratch, Dallas. Like, the sexy positions are down. Like we know who starting quarterback is. It's Giovanni McCoy. We know who the top two wide receivers are, Hayden Hatt and Jermaine Jackson. We know who the number one running back is, Anthony Woods. None of those guys are going to be necessarily the focus of spring football, because for them, spring football is, hey, get rhythm, get in shape, and don't get hurt. But with all that understood, Dallas, there's still a ton that I'm interested in, with one of the big interests itself being, how long is it? When was the last time you remember as a Vandal saying our background is now like, hey, we know we're not going to suck. How do we become good? How do we become something different that can advance in the playoffs? I don't remember having that be a background ever being at Tubbs. I barely remember it being that as the background as being a Vandal ever.
Brian, I think that the 2010 season is about the only season I remember in my life. I was too young to really remember much of the glory days of the 90s, and definitely not around for the glory days of the 80s. The 2010 season, coming back off of the Humanitarian Bowl, and then they lost all those one-score games, and that was the only other time I can think of that I've gone into spring and fall thinking, hey, Idaho should be pretty good again. Like this is uncharted territory for us. But like you alluded to it, like Jerry Rice Award winner Giovanni McCoy coming back at quarterback. Obviously an incredible season that I admittedly did not give him anywhere near enough credit for. 27 touchdowns, 7 picks, 3 touchdowns on the ground. Like, the guy's locked in. At least we assume he's locked in. We've heard some very nice things about Jack Lane, and that the coaching staff is very high on him. And that's something we'll talk about. The backup quarterback position is maybe one of the most heated, but that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about, last spring was, what's Jason Eck going to do? How's he going to find out an offensive line? In spring, the offense looked terrible all spring. Giovanni McCoy started as the 4th quarterback, climbed his way up the depth chart. We don't have that this year. It's the core of a team that won more games than they lost, all came back, and we have every reason to believe that things are going to get even better this year. The schedule is going to be harder, but even guys like, I know, like Sam Herder, the national FCS guys, they're more inch deep, mile wide, because that's the nature of the job. But Idaho's being kicked around in people's like way too early top 10s. Like, people are expecting Idaho to be really good. And Brian, I think that starts with the offensive line. I think last year what we saw is a bunch of young guys getting playing time that maybe they weren't expected to. I don't think anybody expected Aiden Knappich to be a all Big Sky level guy as a true freshman. I don't think that was the plan. I don't think it was the plan to see Tagana Cece. I don't think having him end up starting by the end of the year, I don't think that was quite the plan. If you look at the offensive line now, it's all freshmen and sophomores, minus just a couple guys. Grayson Harwood's a junior. You've got Elijah Sanchez, junior. You've got Jason Hallbeck, grad student, and then new transfer Terrian Rainey. Outside of that, it's back to the freshman and sophomores thing. So it's a little bit nerve-wracking because, again, offensive line super young. You even had Abe Christensen started last year on the offensive line. He moved to the defensive line. I don't know what that means when an offensive line starter gets moved to the other side of the ball. I'm assuming what that means is all the guys that are in here as sophomores and redshirt freshmen that got a year in the program last year, I'm expecting we see them take a step forward. Maybe the offensive line depth just as a whole is improved. So when guys go down, you don't have to fill it in with Aiden Knappich, true freshman walk-on, and hey, all of a sudden he played incredible, but that's not the position you want to be putting guys in, especially on the offensive line. You want them to have a year in the strength program. Brian, this is to me, this is the make or break of this team is going to be, does the offensive line take a step forward? Because that's, I mean, you could see it even in the FCS playoffs. The teams with the best offensive lines are the ones that rule this level of football. And that's, to me, that is the most intriguing story of spring football. Do we see these young guys kind of take that step forward? Does the offense look a lot better in spring ball than it did last year, just based on the fact that the blocking is going to be improved? Brian, you're muted. Motherfucker.
I just said motherfucker too. But no, you hit on it at the end, which is I'm not concerned about the offense itself looking good, because we already saw what it looked during the spring. I mean, we already saw it look great during the actual season when it did not look good early on. What you brought up is how do the young guys on the offensive line look as we get into the scrimmage? And you also look, dude, you hit on it. It's a very, very young offensive line. Now, keep in mind the COVID year is still in play for some of these guys, potentially, especially a redshirt. So like a redshirt sophomore has the COVID year baked in, so a little bit older. But how the offensive line looks is, look, when I head to practice, and look, the first practice is March 28th. I'll be able to make a couple of them. To actually hit the rest of the practice schedule in case you want to go. There's Tuesday, Thursday practice, March 28th, March 30th. And from then on in the month of April, and also in the first week of March, it's 3 practices a week: Saturday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Tuesday, Thursday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And then the spring game is April 28th in Moscow this year. Now, last year, the spring game was the second scrimmage. There was a first scrimmage. That there isn't yet a published day for a first scrimmage, or if there's going to be 2 separate scrimmages. As we get news there, we'll bring it up. But like the ability to open holes for running backs, and also to buy Giovanni McCoy time, because that was one of the part of the subtext of Giovanni McCoy's season being as good as it was last season was the offensive line was certainly not a relative strength for Idaho. And look, Aiden Napick had a great season, but I guarantee Jason Eck heading into the year would tell you, hey, if team's best offensive lineman is a freshman, that usually means the line's not as strong as the head coach probably wants it to be. The difficulty now in spring football, Dallas, engaging offensive line production is the number 2 concern for Idaho football that we're going to look at during spring football is the development of the defensive line, which means, of course, those areas are going to be matching up. Those 2 areas are going to be matching up with each other. And it will probably be a little bit hard to sort what is progress versus what is one group just not quite gelling yet. On the defensive line side, want to hit a couple impact guys who either change positions or might be taking a step up. Transfer into the program, Jakari Larmond from Lincoln University, 6'3", 330 pounds. It's going to be hard to miss that dude at practice. And that beef was that size was something Idaho lacked for virtually all of last football season. And look, this is another intrigue. You brought up Abe Christensen shifting from O-line starter now to defensive lineman, and what that means for Idaho. The Idaho defensive line, look, we lost edge rushers who are technically linebackers as well. So the roster turnaround on the D line isn't a level where I'm kind of concerned about replacing someone's production. But I will say, this far away, I'm not 100% sure who the guys who are going to be kind of the stars of the team on the D line are. And I don't know if anyone is particularly sure. You probably have a couple guys you think are worth keeping an eye on at this point. I already hit a couple.
I think Kamari Bailey is absolutely the guy to keep an eye on. If you're looking for a guy who's going to pop off the page and put up stats like Chuck Akano did back in the Petrino days of like, wow, that guy might have led the Big Sky in sacks if he could have stayed healthy. Like, I think Kamari Bailey is probably that guy. If you're looking for somebody that's going to pop, I think it's Kamari Bailey. He looked really good at the end of last season.
He comes off the edge, kind of like Leo Tomba and Giuliano Falanico did. Both of those guys are gone, so we need someone to take that position. You're right. Kamari Bailey did certainly have moments where he looked strong last year.
And then, you mentioned Abe Christensen. I'm assuming, so anybody that doesn't know, Abe Christensen is listed at 6'5", 295. So that could be, maybe that's why he's moved to defensive line. Maybe they thought the offensive line had enough depth now that they could move a guy over, and maybe he'll start on the D line. Maybe he's beef, which there was not a whole lot of last year. I'm expecting to see that. I'm also, Brian, I'm really hoping that Ben Bertram explodes. He's back for one final season. Really hoping that he has a great year leading. I mean, he is now the quote unquote leader. If you give the senior guys the leader roles, I mean, Ben Bertram now, his second year at the program. He is absolutely the oldest dude in the room. There's also Tylen Coleman. He's a redshirt senior from Western New Mexico in D2. So see that maybe he could end up popping as well. Those are kind of the guys I'm expecting to be the leaders on the defensive line. But again, spring football, it's tough to project some of this when, again, we're talking about games that aren't going to be played for another 6 months.
Yeah, and hey, last one, a guy who contributed last season, Sam Brown, out of Central Valley High School, played in 5 games last season, didn't rack up a ton of tackles, but he was a guy who saw some regular run last season. Is he going to be a guy pop? I don't know, but if he saw a run last season, he's probably going to see a run this season. So look, but those are you hit it earlier. The teams that are strong in the FCS, the teams that are dominating the FCS, it's the teams that are bigger up front. And also, look, we know this. We saw the games. The teams Idaho struggled with were the physical teams last season. That's why Idaho looked much better in my mind against University of Montana than Idaho did against Sacramento State. Yet. Or UC Davis, even though Montana had an objectively better season than UC Davis. The matchup was just different for Idaho. Now, there are still a couple other holes we're looking at too. There's a couple more defensive backs who are going to need to emerge for Idaho. We know a couple who we don't have to be concerned with. Marcus Harris is good. He's going to keep being good. Tommy McCormick is good. He's going to continue to be good. But Idaho does play a decent amount of nickel, so there's sometimes we do have multiple safeties out there, but it was pretty clear Idaho was a corner short last season in pass defense against teams who could move the ball through the air pretty well. Dallas, any guys in particular you're looking at who might be able to step up and be that second cornerback so that Idaho can take a step in the secondary?
So Eck even said at the end of last year that he thought he probably should have played Ormani Arnold more. I think he's probably the leader in the clubhouse to kind of get that shot to be outside of Marcus Harris. And you have some of the older guys. Cam Stevens is a guy that I would expect probably gets a shot. It's curious. I know that we as the Idaho Vandals, like I'm a member of them or something. Mervyn Kenyon and Matthias Bertram both looked really good at the safety position. You mentioned Tommy McCormick. Sean McCormick is also still back there. There's a bunch of guys that I think could get a shot, but what I'm really interested to see is Dwayne McDougal. That's the guy I want to see. Played at NAU last year. He was I think he only played in 1 game, so he's technically coming to Idaho as a freshman. They tried to, as in the coaching staff, they tried to recruit him last season, and he chose NAU. I spoke about it in one of the transfer episodes that he was the guy I was most excited for, because there's nothing to me better than a 18, 19-year-old kid realizing he made a huge mistake, went to a terrible program, decided to correct it and come back. I think Dwayne McDougal already having a year of FCS experience, again, not like he was a full-time starter over at NAU, but had a year in a FCS program's weight room, had a year like learning from FCS coaches. That could be the guy to me, Brian, that has a little bit more of a leg up than some of the the other freshmen and sophomores on the team, just because he's been on the field before. But again, we're talking about a lot of guys that haven't had a bunch of shots. We could see, let's see, Jordan Velasquez, redshirt freshman. He could be the guy. Like we just there's a lot of really young talent in the DB room, so we don't really know yet what's going to pop out there.
Yeah, look, Jason X in terms of the transfers who came into the program stuck with what he told me at Media Day last year, which is it's a trap to use a transfer portal to recruit guys who you're not 100% sure are going to start, which is to say, if you can't land a guy you're sure is going to start, you probably shouldn't be landing transfer guys. And we saw that in this recruiting class, a gigantic freshman class. So there's a ton of young guys, like you said, where we're not trying to not answer the question, Dallas, when we haven't seen these guys on the field. They're all, when we have a ton of freshmen, redshirt freshmen, or sophomores who just haven't had the same kind of run. It's pretty dang hard to project at the specifically, man, in the secondary. The one point I do want to double down on with you is Dwayne McDougal. With the people we talked to, there's a weird amount of energy about Dwayne McDougal coming to the program relative to a guy who didn't really play for NAU. So I'm intrigued with McDougal. Mervyn Kenyon III, also, we saw him have some pretty big plays in the secondary last season at safety. So Mervyn Kenyon having a bigger role in the secondary, hey, like maybe that's one of the names that is going to pop out a little bit more at spring practice. There's a couple offensive Now I'm going to call these not secondary positions, secondary questions, because I think we just hit the big three. If Idaho is stronger at the D line and O line, and if we can improve a little bit in the secondary, it's going to be hard for this not to be a good football team. But we do have a couple other positions that we think stylistically will emerge. I'm going to throw it to you as a little bit of a lead, Dallas, as you scroll down to tight ends. But we know when Jason Eck came over from South Dakota State ran a lot of 2 tight end sets, still do. We know last season, Jason Eck brought this up in interviews, they just didn't have the personnel to run the amount of 2 tight end sets that he would have wanted to do. And look, we had Alex Moore, who was kind of the darling of spring football in last season. Well, he went down with a knee injury in the Washington State game. He was just out for the season, which meant, tight end production went back to Connor Whitney, kind of old reliable. Well, Whitney's gone. So no matter what, the tight end position, we should expect probably increased production out of it, because that's what Eckert said he wanted to do in the first place when he came over. But that's a blank slate position too, Dallas, because again, like Whitney's gone. Whoever the pass catchers are, we haven't seen him that much.
Brian, I think this is the blankest slate on the roster. And if you're looking for a guy to come out of nowhere, obviously we talked about that 5th DB spot is kind of, or the 4th and 5th DB spots are going to be kind of, who really knows? It's just going to be kind of, obviously the McCormicks are going to get in there, but there's going to be rotations, but we don't really know. Tight end is where things are going to get really weird. If you followed the recruiting or followed Martin on Twitter or any of the stuff that we do for recruiting, James White was somebody people were very thrilled about, the freshman from Lewiston. Then you come down to Chance Bogan, who redshirted last year. Chance Bogan decommitted from UW to come here. That was part of the Ford family connection, leaving from Seattle to come to Moscow. But obviously you mentioned Alex Moore. Alex Moore looked like he was going to be incredible. We heard all these great things about him in the spring. We heard some great things about him in the fall, and then unfortunately the knee injury. Right now, Jack Schuster is the old man in the room, and he's a junior, Brian. He is the guy that is experienced. Everybody else here is a freshman or sophomore, or varying degrees of redshirt COVID years with those. So this is the room, Brian, that I'm probably the most excited about, because again, like you said, we've seen tight ends. I mean, Dallas Goedert, San Diego, God damn it. South Dakota State tight end that is one of the best tight ends in the NFL. Like Eck has been around guys that are tight ends. Like we've seen it before. So this is what I'm really excited for. It's also one of the things that I maybe incorrectly criticized Giovanni McCoy for. That I felt like he had a tendency to see 1 read, 2 read, and then run. And sometimes he'd miss the fact that Connor Whitney would just be standing there open for 7 yards. I think that's going to change here. This really feels to me, Brian, like with all the youth here at tight end. I mean, there are a bunch of tight ends on this roster. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There are 10 guys in the tight end room for realistically what you'd expect are 2 spots, maybe 1, depending on if Therese Trainer is able to play and slot in as what you'd assume is one hell of a trio with Hatton, Jackson, and Trainer. 10 tight ends indicates to me that this is going to be an important position here, and we haven't really seen any of these guys before. I mean, again, Jake Cox is a redshirt sophomore, Jack Schuster's a junior, and just about everybody else we really haven't seen a whole lot of. So this is the one I'm most excited about.
Cox and Schuster combined for 3 catches last year.
Yeah,
this is a completely blank slate, and I hate like one of the quote unquote older men in the room because he played during the COVID season, Tanner Brooks. He's a converted linebacker. So at this point, Tanner Brooks, no catches. We've got a lot of guys in the tight end room who aren't going to have catches. So that, yeah, you're correct. Chance Bogan was a big name that just wasn't space for him last season. I'm real, yeah. Tom Kendall in the comment section, some might convert to D, perhaps, of course, but like Dallas said, this is another very young room. It's not the youngest room though. Like, I want to talk about quarterback for a second because we know Giovanni McCoy is going to be a starter, so there isn't question there. And Jason Eck has repeated it multiple times, essentially anywhere he's been interviewed. Giovanni McCoy is a starter. Giovanni McCoy is a starter. We know they had that. They used Jack Lane last season in non-garbage time minutes, and he also started in the Idaho State game when McCoy was hurt. But it's very clear there isn't a quarterback competition in Idaho. Giovanni McCoy is the starter. But I just bring that up. What is going to be, this is one of the position groups where spring football and the depth chart are going to matter a little bit more for the continuity of the roster, because the upperclassmen, Jabari Gibbs and CJ Jordan, they're gone. The oldest player is in the quarterback room is Giovanni McCoy as a redshirt sophomore. Every other quarterback, all the other 4 quarterbacks on the roster, which Dallas, you have it up. That includes redshirt freshman Jack Lane. We have true freshman Jack Wagner, redshirt freshman Ridge Dutchakal, and true freshman Hogan Carmichael. You guys heard that. These guys are all freshmen or redshirt freshmen behind Giovanni McCoy. It does sound like there's at least supposed to be a form of competition for the number 2 quarterback. At the end of last season, that was clearly Jack Lane was the number 2. But it will be interesting to see if a guy like Ridge Dutchakal, who 3-star recruit at Idaho, committed when before Jason Eck had been hired. So that, different recruiting background than the other guys. It will be interesting to see how he moves up or how the other 2 freshmen seem to fit in. Because you guys can read this. We know that players transfer from programs, but with a quarterback room this young where only one plays, you got to expect over the next season, at least some of the freshmen, if Giovanni McCoy continues to stay at Idaho, we got to expect at least a couple of these guys are going to leave at some point. The quarterback order of, from 2 through 5, I think is probably going to be pretty instrumental in dictating who's going to stay at Idaho and who's going to not.
Brian, we heard a lot last year that the coaching staff was very high on Jack Lane, hence again why he started as a walk-on. I believe he did end up getting a scholarship midway through the year. Thank you. Obviously ended up as the number 2, played in not garbage time situations. And then when Giovanni got hurt at the end of the year, he played the Idaho State game. You'd think a guy like that is probably going to stick around because they have ideas for him. But again, if Giovanni McCoy is slotted in, and assuming McCoy doesn't have a chance to go to the NFL early, maybe pack on a little bit of meat on the 6'2" frame, and maybe there's a chance you keep making the progressions and go beyond what Vernon Adams did and have a shot at the NFL. That doesn't happen a ton in the FCS. So if we're talking Giovanni McCoy's the quarterback at Idaho for 3 years, it's pretty hard for me to imagine that a guy like Ridge Dutchakal and Jack Lane, it's tough for me to imagine that both of them stay here. Then you have the freshmen behind them, Wagner and Carmichael. It's tough for me to assume that both of those guys are going to be here for 3 to 4 years. It's just, that's what happens when you have a young guy he won the Jerry Rice Award. He's going to be the guy for a while.
Well, phase 1 for Carmichael would be competing for a scholarship. He's a walk-on. Yeah. So that's his first step, but no, point taken of the backup quarterback is, of course, it's only truly important if your first string quarterback gets hurt, and fingers crossed that doesn't matter. But to me, there probably will be some eventual repercussions of how that quarterback room situates. And we did see, Jason Eck made the starting quarterback position a true competition last year, because Giovanni McCoy started as the number 4 and he moved up to 1. So in theory, people have the ability to move from their given slot based off how they do. We're going to see. And also, I would not be shocked if we do see some of a lot more reps to quarterbacks 2 through 5 on the roster, because like Jason Eck brought it up in his interview with James Aldrich on the Scoreboard. Really interesting. It's a podcast worth looking up on Spotify. The guys who played at, all American level last season, the goal isn't for them to re-earn their spot. They already have it. The goal is for them to stay in shape, keep rhythm, and be ready for the actual season after the spring. We've hit some of the big ones, Dallas. Any other positional questions you think is worth looking at before we
Yeah, the last thing I want to bring up is the running back room. I think the running back room is going to be very interesting because, again, we saw Anthony Woods come in as a true freshman and look honestly like he could be one of the best running backs in the FCS, not just in the Big Sky. And Coach Eck even said reminds him very much of Pierre Strong, who was one of the best running backs in FCS history. Obviously, Anthony Woods is going to be the guy, but is he the bell cow? Is it a 60-40 split? Is it a 50-50 split? What's going to happen? You still have a guy like Nick Romano. He's still here, but man, they brought in a bunch of freshmen, Day, Deshaun Buchanan, Carlos Matheny, Art Williams, all three of those guys very, very highly touted, very much talked positively about on the recruiting episode that Martin and I did. Then you have some guys that we haven't seen a whole lot of, Hayden Kinchlow, Trent Elstad, Bridger Stevens. Again, this is another very young room. It's very interesting. Eck here in year 2 has purged a lot of those Petrino guys. They've moved on. That's where most of the transfers out were guys that were brought in by Petrino and have moved on. We're talking, okay, we've seen Anthony Woods, we've seen Nick Romano. We haven't really seen a lot of the rest of the running backs. It'll be interesting to see if this is going to be Anthony Woods from day 1 to the final snap of the season, or if we're going to get some of those other guys sprinkled in.
Well, and I just want to hit something in case some of our viewers are not clear. There is a real competition for not only who the number 2 running back is, but what the heck that position is going to look like. Last season's complimentary running backs behind Woods, Roschon Johnson graduated. Man, Roschon Johnson felt like he was just here for 1,000 years. Not a complaint, but it's been a while since we've had a spring football episode that didn't talk about Roschon Johnson. But then Eli Cummings, who was to me the clear second best running back on the team behind Woods last year, he's gone. He hit the transfer portal. So Eli Cummings is a contributor that Idaho's going to replace it somehow. I'm sure that Anthony Woods is going to get a bit more touches, but having the role of a pass catching running back, or the role of your running back who, sometimes is going to be, running the sweeps or, going out more around than Anthony Woods does. Woods is dynamic, but the Eli Cummings and Woods did have some different runs and they had different strengths. Who the heck is going to merge for that kind of change of pace or pass catching running back? That's going to be one of the things, again, we're looking for. And I want to bring this up as something to pay attention to, because Anthony Woods was not really on anyone's radar unless you went to the scrimmages. I went to one and saw Anthony Woods look incredible. But at the time, that was that first scrimmage. He was still with the 2s. He had not emerged as a potential first string candidate.
Well, and Brian, you even spoke with me about it after the game. You're like, that Anthony Woods looks really good, but Roschon looked really good too. I think Roschon's going to be the guy. And then it ended up Roschon was the short yardage guy, and Anthony Woods had stepped into that number 1 role by the time the season rolled around. So even if a guy like, I think Day Buchanan is probably the one that's the hotness. Tom Kendall even said it. Buchanan's the new running back I'm most interested in. I know it's tape. Everybody looks good on their tape, but he was the home run guy. He could come out of nowhere. Maybe he's 50-50 with Woods, or again, maybe Woods takes 90% of the carries and all the rest of these guys get scraps. We have no idea. And even, again, what it's going to look like in spring is not necessarily what it's going to look like in the fall.
Yeah. Just to address it, I would be floored if Anthony Woods is a 50-50 timeshare. But
I completely agree.
But I'm just bringing up functionally, we don't have an answer for who the pass catching running back is. So that I guess is another kind of storyline to look at in spring football. But to start closing this out, it's now niche things we're looking at. Spring football at a stable program is just different, and it's not going to be quite as full of like developments and excitement this season for Idaho. And that's a good thing. If you look at Montana, University of Montana already started their spring football. There isn't question at University of Montana of, can Montana be a pretty good team? The question is, okay, what happens for Montana to be great? Idaho, I'm not going to jump to the conversation of great yet, but I'm going to hit back to what Jason X said in the interview with James Aldridge. Idaho's next step is to make another step. Idaho has to start beating more playoff teams. that's the lens I'm going to be looking at Idaho at for spring football and heading into the start of the season. And again, it's simple to look at running back, wide receiver, and like who's starting as quarterback, and those are the sexy questions. But that's not where Idaho is, and God, that's fantastic news, man.
Brian, we have a second straight season of optimism. We had, again, tempered optimism, I think, from the PTSD of, again, the Petrino years, the Akey years, the Erickson year, the Holt years, the Cable years. Like there were a lot of years there that were just like getting punched in the face repeatedly. So our optimism, again, we got dunked on, or we is a strong term. I got dunked on for picking Montana in the Montana-Idaho game. Outside of that, like we had thought, hey, this is when the program starts turning around. They turned it around a little faster than we did. And now here we are. Second straight year, we're talking about football as a fun thing at Idaho instead of the sad thing that everyone tries to just bury their head in the sand and hope for next year. This is crazy, Brian. Like I don't really know how to handle this. We're talking about Vandal football was good last year, and they're probably going to be good again this year. Is that allowed?
Allegedly. I've heard that is a world some people exist in. It's not one I've ever inhabited. But only thing I want to touch on there, and then we're ready to go, is when you bring up optimism, I always get touchy about people talking about like the view of stuff as being positive or negative, because that's not how I understand what we talk about. But to a moron like me, when you say optimism, you mean no, earned optimism. We have seen evidence of a program being turned around, because that's what Eck did in his first year. We've seen evidence that leads you to believe if he can do it once without his own guys, he can probably do it again, but with his guys. So just want to bring that up to over-explain the topic, man. I'm stoked for spring football. I want to tell any listener, if you're going to head to any of the spring practices, feel free to DM us, because I can go to a couple practices, but Dallas and I work full time and we don't live in Moscow. So we, just like last season, we relied on others for our eyes. You want to be our eyes, man. We're more than welcome to take your observations. Next week, I'll be talking with a guest of some sort to go over what we learned from early in spring practice. But we're not yet at the true dry spell of Vandal Sports Dallas. That's going to be after spring football. Mm-hmm. So I'm honestly just going to try to soak this in as much as I can. This is until we get into September, until we get into August, because that's when fall camp starts back up. Mm-hmm. We're going to have a long gap of not really a ton of Vandal sports stuff to talk about. This and recruiting for basketball are kind of the last big waves before the break. So I just want to tell everyone, look, we have virtually all the coaches are back minus like quality control. All the coaches are back. That doesn't always happen at the FCS. We know these guys aren't going to be in here forever. If you can go down to practice, go down to enjoy it, make sure to soak this up while it's fun, because things change. Coaching staff change in a heartbeat. The time to get into Vandal football, if you can, starts in the spring and then heads into the season. Buy your season tickets and patreon.com/Tubs of the Club Dallas.
Brian, I think I only have one thing left to say. Go Vandals.
Go Vandals. This is producer Brian doing a terrible job of even finding what we're going to play us out with. So we're just going to call it good. See you guys Tuesday.